The first blast hit without warning. At 8:32 p.m., as the sun dipped below the horizon, New York City held its breath. In the sky above, a massive shadow loomed, silent, immense, and ominous. For a brief second, the streets were bathed in orange as the city's skyline shimmered in the last light of day. And then, the world was torn apart. A roar like thunder split the air as a foreign energy pierced the skyline. Buildings shook, glass exploded, and the pavement cracked open as the first wave of destruction unleashed. Above the skyscrapers, an enormous alien ship loomed, its dark hull shimmering under the city lights. The attack was swift. Military forces, unprepared for such an overwhelming onslaught, scrambled to respond, but they were like ants beneath a boot. Explosions tore through Times Square. The military's aerial assault was nothing but a brief, ineffective flicker against the incoming barrage. In the midst of it all stood Jack Hamilton, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the sky. The towering buildings surrounding him seemed to pulse with a strange, unnatural light, their windows flashing white with the intensity of the attack. Jack didn't flinch. His heart pounded, but his mind was already working, calculating, analyzing. This wasn't just an invasion. This was the end. Get to cover. Move! A voice screamed from behind him. A fellow soldier, one of many scattered throughout the city, pulled Jack by the arm, but Jack resisted, his gaze still fixed on the sky. What are we supposed to do? They've got weapons that. Before he could finish, a second blast tore through the air, sending a wave of force that knocked them both to the ground. The soldier never got up. Jack's mind raced as chaos erupted around him. The blast had obliterated the military's first line of defense. Jets streaked across the sky, but they were met with defensive pulses that turned them into falling fireballs in seconds. It was clear now. Earth had no chance. The alien force was insurmountable, their technology unfathomable. Jack pulled himself to his feet, his body aching from the impact, but his determination didn't waver. He'd seen the destruction from the military intel reports, the satellites showing fleets of alien warships flooding Earth's atmosphere. It was exactly like what he had warned them about. But no one listened. No one had ever believed humanity would face such an overwhelming force. He stumbled to a communications terminal, quickly accessing military networks. His fingers danced across the screen as he tried to establish a connection with command. The display blinked and sputtered, flashing rapidly before finally freezing. His pulse quickened. Only one message appeared on the screen. All units fall back. Earth is lost. He slammed his fist against the terminal. A bitter laugh escaped him, but there was no humor in it, only the bitter taste of defeat. The world was crumbling. The invaders had come for a reason. The question was, what now? His thoughts were interrupted by the voice of Major Caroline Hayes, one of his former colleagues. She appeared in the doorway, her face grim. "Jack, we need to get out of here now." He didn't move. "They're not coming back, are they?" Jack muttered, the weight of the question hanging in the air. Hayes didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth was already clear. In the silence that followed, the chaos outside seemed to intensify. The ground shook again, a deep rumble that sent cracks through the pavement. It felt like the entire city was being pulled apart. Jack turned and finally met her gaze. "We can still fight, Caro. They're not going to stop. We can't win this one," she interrupted, shaking her head. "It's not a battle we're going to win, Jack. This is an extinction event." Jack's jaw tightened, his mind grappling with the cold truth. He had spent years training for this moment, preparing contingency plans. But it didn't matter. They had underestimated them, underestimated the aliens. They had no idea what Earth was up against. "Then we do what we always do. We survive," Jack said, his voice steady now. Hayes stared at him. "Survive? You're talking about starting a war with no army, no supplies, nothing. They've already wiped out our defenses. What can we possibly do?" Jack's eyes darkened. He had already seen what the Zorith were capable of. Their technology was far beyond anything Earth had ever conceived. But it didn't matter. Humanity had faced worse odds. The Revolution, the World Wars, the Great Depression. Every time, The human race had found a way to endure. "No," he said, turning to face the streets again, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "Not just survive. We fight back. We show them we're not weak, that we won't just be erased." Hayes didn't argue, but the doubt in her eyes was clear. Her face was pale, her uniform torn, but there was a flicker of something. Maybe hope, maybe defiance. The fire that had been missing in so many of them. Maybe Jack was right. "We need to rally whatever's left," Jack said, turning back to her. "We'll find people. Survivors. We'll fight. The Zorth think they can crush us in a day. I'm going to make them regret that mistake." "Where do we start?" Hayes asked. Jack scanned the horizon, his mind already moving ahead. He had no time to waste. The city was falling, and so were many others. But there were still pockets of resistance. Small groups. People who could still be saved. There's an old military base on the outskirts of the city. If we can get there, we can find more fighters. More tech. We can make a stand. "We have to move now," Hayes said. She was already heading for the door. Jack followed, determination in his stride. Outside, the city was a war zone. Alien ships flew low, their weapons lighting up the sky. The streets were filled with the sounds of destruction. Screams, explosions, the sounds of a world in collapse. But Jack had one thing left. One thing the aliens didn't understand. Humans didn't give up. As he and Hayes moved into the chaos, Jack's resolve hardened. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Earth was about to show the aliens something they'd never seen before. Humanity's fight. They had just begun. This chapter sets the stage for the conflict, focusing on the emotional toll the invasion takes on Jack, and how his resolve to fight back begins to solidify. It highlights the devastation of the attack, while offering a glimpse of hope through the protagonist's determination to rally the survivors. Chapter 2. The Resistance. The streets were silent now. The chaos of the invasion had become a distant hum, the sounds of destruction giving way to eerie quiet. The city was a war zone, but in the shadows, survivors were beginning to gather, forming the first sparks of resistance. Jack moved through the ruined streets, his steps sure and deliberate. His mind raced, formulating plans, running through contingencies. They needed more people, more supplies, and, above all, a way to fight back. But that wasn't going to happen in the open. The Zorth had every corner of the city under surveillance. A full-scale attack could come at any moment. "Jack, there's no time," Maya said, her voice tinged with frustration. She had been with him since the early days of the invasion. A tech genius, she could break into almost anything. Right now, she was busy checking the equipment they had scavenged. "We don't have time to be careful," Jack snapped, his eyes scanning the skyline, watching for any sign of the alien ships that still hovered above the city. "If we don't make a move now, we'll lose whatever chance we have left." She sighed, clearly tired, but not willing to argue. Maya was sharp, too sharp to waste time debating when there was work to be done. "I know," she muttered, pulling her long black hair back into a tight ponytail. "But you can't keep running on fumes. We need to be smarter than this. Reckless doesn't win wars." Jack stopped in his tracks and turned to face her. "Reckless is the only thing we've got left. They've got the numbers, the technology, and we've got what exactly? A few broken weapons and stolen supplies? If we wait too long, we're as good as dead." Maya didn't reply, but her gaze softened. She knew he was right. There was nothing left to lose. The world was burning, and the longer they waited, the harder it would be to rally anyone to their cause. The group had grown since the first night. Small pockets of survivors, civilians, soldiers, engineers, had trickled in, each adding their skills to the growing resistance. But none of them had any formal training. They were just ordinary people who had watched their world collapse and decided they weren't going to sit around waiting to die. "Ready to move out?" Tom asked, appearing from behind a pile of rubble. He was one of the few military personnel left from the initial assault. A grizzled ex-soldier with a permanent scowl etched on his face. Tom was a rock Jack could rely on when things got tough. "Not yet," Jack answered. He turned to the small group of survivors who had gathered around the makeshift command center they'd set up. There was Elena, a former fighter pilot who now ran missions when they needed speed and precision. Across from her, Liam, and Sarah, two former engineers, were trying to cobble together whatever tech they could find to use against the Zorith. Then there was Tom, the muscle, and Maya, the brain. Together, they formed the nucleus of what was slowly becoming a resistance. "This isn't a sprint," Jack continued, his voice low but firm. "We need to do this carefully. If we rush in without a plan, it'll be over before we even start." Maya stepped forward, holding up a small, makeshift map she had put together using a combination of military intel and local grid data. "We've located a Zorth command center on the outskirts. It's heavily guarded, but it's also the only place where we might be able to get weapons. Real weapons. Not this junk we're using now." "You're sure about this?" Tom asked, his gruff voice tinged with skepticism. "Last time we went after something like this, half our team didn't come back." "I'm sure," Maya answered. "This isn't just some random target. If we can hit this place, we might stand a chance. It's either this or sit here and wait to get wiped out. Our options are running out." Jack let the words sink in. The stakes were clear. If they didn't act, they would be swallowed up by the alien forces. The Zorith were methodical, efficient. They wouldn't give humanity the time to regroup. And yet, Jack knew he couldn't afford to move recklessly. They had to be smart. Stealth was their best weapon. "All right," Jack said, breaking the silence. "We move at dawn. Maya, you'll handle communications. I want to know exactly what we're walking into before we get there. Tom, you're with me. Elena, Liam, Sarah, prep the transport. If we're going to pull this off, we need to be out before the Zorith even know we're there." The team nodded, moving to their stations. Jack stood back for a moment, taking it all in. This was it. No more waiting. They were on the brink of something much bigger than survival. They were about to strike back. The night passed quietly, the distant sounds of the alien warships overhead the only reminder of the danger that loomed over them. When dawn broke, the group was ready. They had what little gear they could gather, makeshift weapons, stolen Zorth technology, and whatever transport they could cobble together. The route was risky, but it was their only shot. As they moved through the wreckage of the city, Jack's mind raced. He had always been the strategist, always calculating the odds and finding the best course of action. But this time, the stakes were personal. Too many lives had already been lost, and he couldn't afford to lose anymore. He had to make sure that every step counted. "Stay sharp," Tom muttered, his voice barely above a whisper as they moved through the abandoned streets. "We've got this," Jack said, trying to keep the fear from creeping into his voice. "Just stick to the plan. We move fast, we hit hard, and we get out before they can retaliate." The command center was just ahead, its outline barely visible against the backdrop of destroyed buildings. Jack could feel his pulse quicken, the tension in the air thickening. They were close now, too close to back down. The Zorith would be expecting them, and yet they had no choice but to charge forward. They reached the entrance of the Zorith's command center with only moments to spare. Jack gave one final look at his team. "On my mark," he said, his voice steady. 3, 2, 1. The world exploded into action. This chapter shows the formation of the Resistance and the early challenges Jack and his team face in their fight against the alien invaders. The group, while inexperienced and under-equipped, has an unshakable resolve to fight back, and their first mission becomes a critical test of their abilities and unity. Chapter 3: The moon hung in the sky like an indifferent watcher as the Resistance prepared for their most daring mission yet. The Zorith's hold on Earth was tightening, and Jack knew they had little time left. If they were going to make a difference, it had to be now. "We're almost there," Elena said, her voice calm despite the tension that hung in the air. She was piloting the makeshift shuttle they had cobbled together from stolen tech, the craft vibrating as it pushed through the cold vacuum of space toward the moon's surface. Behind her, Jack and the rest of the team were strapped into their seats, each one silently preparing for what was to come. The mission was simple on paper. Infiltrate the Zorith's lunar base, destroy their main communications hub, and get out before the enemy realized what had happened. But Jack knew better than to call any part of this simple. Nothing was simple anymore. The alien forces had vast resources, and the moon was their stronghold, a place where they had set up operations too well. Jack glanced at the rest of the team. Maya, the tech expert, was hunched over a small holographic display, fingers flying across the interface as she ran through the mission parameters. Her expression was focused, though the exhaustion in her eyes was undeniable. "How are we looking?" Jack asked, keeping his voice low. "Navigation systems are set," Maya replied without looking up. "We're on course, but there's a Zorth patrol ship in the vicinity. We'll need to be quick." Jack nodded, his jaw tightening. Quick was their only option. There was no room for hesitation now. The shuttle's engines hummed, a low but steady sound as they neared the lunar surface. As the base came into view, the sprawling complex of metallic structures seemed almost serene against the stark, barren landscape. But Jack knew better than to be fooled by the moon's silent appearance. The Zorth had made this place their fortress, and no corner would be left unguarded. "Engines off," Elena muttered. The shuttle's hum faded to silence, and they coasted the final few meters to the surface. Maya's fingers danced across her display again. "I've hacked into their surveillance system. For the next 10 minutes, they won't see us coming." The shuttle hit the moon's surface with a soft thud, the impact barely noticeable through the thick padding of the seats. Jack unclipped his harness and stood, motioning for the others to follow suit. "Let's move," he said, his voice clipped with urgency. They emerged from the shuttle, the desolate landscape of the moon stretching out before them. The base was less than a mile away, close enough for them to reach quickly, but not without danger. Jack led the way, his eyes scanning every shadow and crevice, knowing that the Zorth were always watching, even when they thought they were safe. Tom, as always, was at his side, the heavy-set ex-soldier carrying their largest weapon. The rest of the team followed closely, moving with a precision that came only from necessity. If they were caught, this mission would be their last. "You see that?" Elena whispered, pointing to a cluster of Zorth drones hovering nearby. They were barely visible in the low light, their forms blending in with the metal walls of the base. "I see it," Jack replied, his voice tight. "Stay low, stay quiet." They crouched, moving like shadows as they neared the entrance of the Zorth facility. Maya's fingers worked quickly, hacking into the security system once more to bypass the base's locks. A soft beep signaled their success, and the door slid open with a hiss. They moved inside, the cold metal of the base giving off an eerie hum as the sound of their footsteps echoed down the empty hallways. "We need to reach the central communications hub," Jack said. "It's our only shot at cutting off their command. If we can do that, we might be able to destabilize their entire operation." Maya nodded, her eyes flicking to the map she'd pulled up on her wrist interface. "This way," she said, pointing down the corridor. "I've got a direct line to the communications room." The team moved quickly, their boots echoing off the cold metal floors. They passed several doors, but none of them seemed to lead anywhere useful. Every corner was a potential danger, every doorway a threat. But as they neared the central hub, something felt off. Jack's senses were on high alert, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up. The usual hum of the base had quieted, and there was a sense of tension in the air. "Something's wrong," Tom muttered, his hand tightening around his weapon. Maya's eyes flicked to the map again. The communications hub should be right ahead. But wait, there's a Zorth commander in the area. Jack's heart skipped a beat. "Commander?" "Yeah," Maya said, her voice sharp. "We're not alone. They know we're here." The sound of footsteps echoed from down the hall, growing louder with each passing second. Jack's pulse quickened. "Get ready," he said, his voice low but firm. The team fanned out, taking cover behind crates and pillars as the footsteps grew closer. Jack could hear the Zorth commander now, his voice muffled but unmistakable, barking orders in an alien tongue. "Stay down," Jack whispered, his hand motioning for the team to remain as still as possible. The commander appeared, flanked by two heavily armed Zorth soldiers. They marched past, unaware of the human resistance hiding just feet away. "Now," Jack whispered, his voice barely audible. In one swift motion, they sprang into action. Tom's heavy weapon fired first, a deafening blast that sent the nearest Zorth soldier crashing into the wall. Elena was next, her agility allowing her to disable the other guard before he could react. Maya tapped a few commands on her interface, and the commander's own weapon systems malfunctioned, rendering him helpless. "Clear!" Tom shouted, his voice steady. Jack moved forward, his heart pounding in his chest. They had no time to waste. They reached the communications hub just as Maya breached the final security lock. The door hissed open, and they poured inside, weapons raised. Jack scanned the room, his eyes flicking across the various screens and terminals. "There," Maya said, pointing to the central console. "That's the heart of their operation." Jack didn't hesitate. He approached the terminal, his fingers flying across the controls. The system hummed to life as he began to hack into the mainframe. "This will cut their communications, but we'll only have a few minutes before they notice," Maya warned. "Make it quick." Jack gritted his teeth and typed faster. The system was complex, far more advanced than anything he'd ever worked with. But he'd trained for this. He had to. The fate of the mission and of humanity depended on it. Come on, Jack muttered under his breath. The terminal beeped, and the screen flashed green. The communications hub was offline. "We're done here," Jack said, his voice steady but urgent. "Let's move out." As they made their way back to the shuttle, Jack felt a strange weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't victory, not yet. But this was a blow, a significant one, and for the first time since the invasion had begun, he could see a flicker of hope. Chapter 4. The air was thick with tension as Jack stood before the makeshift command center, staring at the flickering holographic map. The Zorith had reacted swiftly to the disruption of their communications, but it wasn't enough to break their stranglehold on Earth. Jack knew it wasn't going to be easy, but the Resistance had one last chance to strike a decisive blow. If they failed here, the rest of humanity would fall. "We're almost out of time," Jack muttered to himself. His fingers brushed across his face, feeling the exhaustion etched into his skin. The team had been pushing themselves for days, and the last mission had cost them more than they could afford. The Zorith were relentless, their resources nearly infinite. The final assault was their only shot. Tom's voice broke through his thoughts. "Jack, we've got one shot at this. Are we doing this or not?" Jack nodded, pushing the doubt aside. "We're doing it. We have no other option." Elena walked up behind him, her face hard but focused. "The transport's ready. If we hit them now, we've got a chance to cripple their central command. If we wait too long," she didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear. "There would be no tomorrow if they didn't act now." "I know," Jack said, turning to face the team. "This is it. We either take out their command or we fade into history. This is what we've been working for. Stick to the plan. We move fast, hit hard, and get out before they can retaliate." Maya, already deep in her console, spoke up. "I've mapped the location. Zorith forces are concentrated in the central facility, but there are fewer patrols than expected. We're lucky this time. If we can knock out the generators first, we could disable their entire command center." Jack raised an eyebrow. "And the catch?" "There's always a catch," Maya replied, her fingers moving swiftly over the keys. "We'll need to plant the explosives in a specific sequence, or they'll just trigger the failsafes. And once the countdown begins, they'll know we're there. We won't have much time." "Understood," Jack said, his voice unwavering. "Let's make this count." They set out in the early hours, moving through the ruins of a once bustling city. The landscape was scarred by the alien invasion. Familiar streets, now unrecognizable underpiles of rubble and twisted metal. Every step felt like a silent challenge to the Zorith, the alien invaders who had reduced their world to dust. As they neared the facility, the silence was deafening. Jack's breath fogged in the cold night air, but the weight of his thoughts was heavier than the cold ever could be. The time for hesitation was long past. He glanced over at his team, Maya, Tom, Elena, and the others. Each one of them had their own reasons for fighting, their own losses. They made it this far, but there was no guarantee they would make it through the next few hours. "We're here," Elena said quietly, her eyes scanning the entrance of the facility. Her voice was sharp, focused. "Stay close, and don't make a sound." They approached the facility with precision, careful to stay hidden in the shadows. The Zorith base loomed ahead, its dark towers cutting into the night sky, a monolithic reminder of the alien empire's dominance. But for the first time in weeks, Jack felt something shift inside him. Hope. The fleeting, fragile kind that had almost slipped away. As they neared the entrance, Maya tapped into the base's security system. The screen on her wrist flickered, then blinked green. "We're in. Go." The door slid open with a soft hiss, and the team rushed inside, slipping through the narrow corridor like shadows. The air was thick with the hum of alien machinery, but the base was eerily quiet. There were no guards in sight. It almost felt too easy, but Jack knew better. "We don't have long," he whispered, his voice low. "Stay sharp." They moved quickly through the corridors, past the cooling units, the weapon caches, the hidden doors. Maya led the way, her fingers tracing the digital map on her wrist as she checked their route. They were close to the central generator, and once they planted the explosives, there would be no turning back. "We're almost there," Maya murmured. "Just another 100 yards. Suddenly, the stillness of the base shattered with the shrill blare of an alarm. Red lights flashed, and a voice echoed through the intercom in an alien language. "They've detected us," Tom said, his voice tight. "We need to move now." "We're close," Jack said, his eyes narrowing. "Maya, get those charges in place." Maya worked quickly, connecting wires to the generator's main power lines. The explosives hummed with an unnatural energy, a stark contrast to the sterile quiet of the base. She stepped back once they were set, her breath shallow. "It's done. Let's go." But just as they turned to retreat, a squad of Zorith soldiers appeared from a nearby hallway, their red eyes glowing menacingly in the dark. They raised their weapons, and the first shots rang out, their weapons crackling with the hum of deadly energy. "Cover!" Jack shouted, diving behind a steel pillar. The team scattered, taking cover where they could. Bullets whizzed through the air, burning through the walls around them. Tom's weapon roared to life, sending a blast of firepower toward the enemy. The Zorith soldiers staggered, but they quickly regrouped, advancing with ruthless efficiency. "They're not giving up," Elena said, breathless as she returned fire. "We need to finish this, Jack." "I'm working on it," Jack shouted, his eyes locked on the countdown timer on Maya's wrist. The seconds were ticking away. Their window of escape was closing. Maya tapped into the nearby control panel, working her fingers over the keys, trying to disable the alarm. "I'm almost there, just hold on." Jack's heart pounded as he took aim at the advancing soldiers. "Keep them off us," he shouted. The Zorith pushed forward, their armor gleaming under the harsh lighting of the base. Tom fired again, but the enemy was relentless. Jack didn't know how much longer they could hold out. The base was closing in on them, the Zorith forces multiplying with every passing second. Just as the countdown reached its final seconds, Maya's voice broke through the chaos. "It's done. We're set. Get to the shuttle, now." The explosion rocked the base, shaking the very foundation beneath them. A deafening roar filled the air as the generator's core exploded, sending a shockwave through the facility. The lights flickered and went out as the Zorith base fell into chaos. "Move!" Jack shouted, and the team scrambled toward the exit, their adrenaline pumping as they ran. Behind them, the base was falling apart. The Zorith were scrambling to regain control, but it was too late. They reached the shuttle, breathless and battered. As the door slid shut behind them, Jack took one last look at the crumbling base. The Zorith had lost their grip on Earth Command Center, but the fight was far from over. "We did it," Maya said, her voice breathless but triumphant. Jack leaned back in his seat, eyes on the horizon. "No, this is just the beginning." The final battle had been fought, and humanity had struck a powerful blow against the alien invaders. But Jack knew this was only the first step. The war was far from over. The smoke from the Zorith base still lingered in the cold vacuum of space, a reminder of their victory. But as Jack stared out at the growing blue expanse of Earth below, a sense of emptiness gnawed at him. The Resistance had won a significant battle, yes, but the war was far from over. Earth was far from safe. The shuttle rocked slightly as it entered Earth's atmosphere. Jack leaned forward in his seat, fingers gripping the armrest as the team settled into the final stretch of their journey. His mind churned with the weight of what was to come. The Zorth had lost their grip on Earth's central command, but their empire was vast. They wouldn't let go without a fight. They were wounded now, but Jack knew better than anyone. They would strike back harder than ever before. Elena, Jack called to the front, where she was piloting the shuttle. How much longer? 5 minutes. Elena answered without glancing up. We'll be entering the perimeter zone soon. Good, Jack said, nodding. Get ready, everyone. This won't be easy. The rest of the team sat in silence, their faces reflecting exhaustion and hope in equal measure. Tom was slumped in his seat, his weapon resting at his side, while Maya studied a digital map on her wrist, her brow furrowed in concentration. Sarah and Liam sat together, eyes wide, still processing everything that had happened. Jack knew how they felt. They had just come from the belly of the beast, defying all odds, disabling the Zorth's communications, and striking at the heart of their operations. But there was no real victory without sacrifice. People had died. There were holes in their ranks that could never be filled. And the pain of losing those comrades was a weight that sat heavy on Jack's chest. The shuttle dipped through the atmosphere, its engines roaring as the ground grew larger. Jack's eyes narrowed as they descended, scanning the land below. The familiar landscapes were now scarred by the invasion. Cities reduced to rubble, forests scorched by alien weaponry, homes abandoned. It was a broken world, but it was still his world. We'll land outside the capital, Jack said, his voice firm. We need to establish contact with the surviving factions. The resistance is fragmented, and we need to unite everyone before the Zorth regroup. We don't have much time. Elena nodded. Understood. The shuttle began its final descent, the thrusters blazing as they slowed their speed. Jack felt the familiar weightlessness of re-entry tugging at him, but he kept his focus on the task ahead. They had won, but this was the calm before the storm. There was still so much left to do. The shuttle touched down with a soft thud, kicking up dust from the cracked earth beneath them. Jack unbuckled his seatbelt and stood, glancing at his team. Each of them looked worn, their faces marked by the hardships of the past days. But there was something else in their eyes, something that had been missing for too long. Hope, determination, the kind of fire that could light the way forward, even in the darkest of times. We're not done yet, Jack said, his voice steady. We need to move fast. This city may still be crawling with Zorth forces. The team grabbed their gear, preparing for whatever was next. They moved out of the shuttle in tactical formation, scanning their surroundings with practiced eyes. The air was thick, the stillness almost suffocating. Every step they took felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of the world itself was pushing down on them. But Jack pushed it aside. This was their home. They were not going to let it fall. As they approached the ruined outskirts of the capital, the resistance outpost came into view, a dilapidated compound hidden among the remnants of fallen buildings. Jack's heart raced, but this time it wasn't out of fear. It was anticipation. The outpost was a symbol of the last hope for humanity, the place where survivors could come together and rally for the final fight. Stay alert, Jack muttered, scanning the horizon. He could feel the intensity in the air, the weight of the moment pressing on him like a vice. He wasn't just fighting for his life anymore. He was fighting for everyone, for Earth, for the future. As they entered the compound, the remnants of the resistance were visible. A few scattered soldiers, technicians, and civilians, all weary and battered from the invasion. They had been holding on by a thread, just like Jack and his team. The atmosphere was tense, but there was a flicker of hope in the eyes of those who saw Jack and his team approach. A man stepped forward, his eyes sharp despite the weariness on his face. Jack, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You did it. You actually did it. Jack nodded, his expression grim. We've only just begun. We've crippled their command center, but the Zorth are far from finished. We need to unite what's left of the resistance and prepare for the next phase. We can't afford to waste time. The man, who Jack recognized as General Turner, a leader of one of the resistance factions, met his gaze. We've been waiting for you, he said, his tone firm. The Zorth may have lost ground, but they'll retaliate soon enough. We need to act fast while we still have the momentum. Jack's eyes hardened. That's exactly what I intend to do. Gather everyone you can. We need to make a final stand. The general nodded and turned to gather the rest of the resistance, organizing them into squads. Jack took a deep breath and walked to the center of the compound, where a makeshift communications system had been set up. Maya immediately got to work, hacking into what was left of the global networks to relay their message to any surviving factions. Within minutes, broadcasts began to flood the airwaves, the message clear and direct. This is not the end. The resistance lives. We will fight. We will survive. As the words echoed across the broken world, something shifted. There was a spark of unity, a rallying cry for anyone who still had the will to fight. The fragmented remnants of humanity were starting to piece themselves together. Jack turned to the rest of the team, his eyes burning with the weight of their responsibility. They had started a war with the Zorith, and it had cost them dearly. But it had also lit a fire in the hearts of the people who had witnessed their bravery. The battle was far from won, but for the first time, Jack believed they had a real chance. "We're not just surviving anymore," he said, his voice steady but full of resolve. "We're fighting for the future, for Earth, and we won't stop until we win." The team stood with him, the weight of their losses still fresh, but their resolve stronger than ever. The Zorith had underestimated humanity. They had thought them weak, easy to crush, but they hadn't counted on the strength of a species that refused to surrender, a species that fought for survival, for each other, and for the future. The war was far from over, but as Jack looked at the faces of his team and the survivors around him, he knew one thing for certain. Humanity was far from finished. It had just begun. The conclusion of this chapter emphasizes the resilience of humanity, as Jack and his team prepare for the next phase of the battle. The Resistance has found a glimmer of hope in the darkest of times, and now they are united in their determination to fight for a future free from the Zorith.